but there is no guarantee. Therefore, I combine the two, and if it's empathy, great. If it's sympathy, great. But we have to find some kind of personal way in for students with the texts we're reading. This is also part of that cognitive and affective connection making that we want. So level one is a cognitive activity. Level one is ensuring that they can read the words and that they understand what the words mean at the most basic level. Now we want them to begin to feel a little bit about what they're reading. We want them to begin to connect with their heart, not just their head. So the question I always ask is, what do we mean when we talk about sympathy or empathy? And you'll recall the idea of the transaction, which has been driving everything we do. And you'll recall the transaction um, diagram on which I build all of my teaching, right? You know, you've got the reader, you've got the text, and you've got the collision of those two into making meaning within a particular context, right? And one of the things that Appelman talks about is that left side, which we call the reader side of the text. I think it's on the left. Anyway, I put it on the left. Here's where the reader is. And what does the reader bring to the transaction? That is what was new with what Rosenblatt did. That was what was new with this idea of the transactional theory or reader response. It's that the reader is given a role in making meaning. That's what we're trying to do. That doesn't mean they get to rewrite the text. It means that we acknowledge and honor what the student brings. In the same way, we acknowledge and honor the integrity of the text. So we need to inform them of that. And the left side, the side that asks them, what do you bring? Have you felt something like this? Can you imagine feeling something like this? Have you experienced something like this? Can you imagine experiencing something like this? That's what we're talking about when we talk about level two. That's what we get where, okay, they've read. Terrific. But unless they care, the entire reading experience, the entire meaning-making experience will stay at that very surface level. If we want them to engage deeply, they have to care. And we've talked about this for those of you who have been in classes with me previously. This is the text to self moment, right? Where we say, how does the text connect to you? And since students don't often feel as if their voice or their self is acknowledged in the classroom, this is the opportunity to do that for them. So let's take a look at the skills cultivated at level 2. This is our Bloom's revised taxonomy. It's just a different graphic, and the skills are not the kind that we might necessarily see a lot of in our Common Core standards, right? Not, the standards are really about the cognitive connection. I think they imply a more effective connection, but let's say that they really tend to focus on those higher order thinking skills that do include creativity. That's one of the things that was added to the Bloom's revised taxonomy. But creativity is more of an intellectual activity. So we want them to begin to relate to the things, hence empathy, sympathy. We want them to imagine, because in order to connect to things you don't necessarily know, you have to be able to imagine something different. The idea of inventing, projecting, identifying. These are the kinds of skills. These are the kinds of verbs that we will see in some of your objectives at this level. So let's take a look at some non-writing specific tasks, things that you can do. Think of these often as hooks or early activities that will lead students to deeper, more analytical tasks, and that's level 3. You'll see in some of the lesson plans I ask you to develop, I say start with a level 1 and move to a level 2 in a particular lesson. I want to see you write a lesson that starts at level 2 and then moves to level 3, so that we begin to see that the levels of response are not discrete, but that if you start to connect with them on a personal level, it's easier to get them to do more critical analysis than you might have gotten if you just started with facts. So one thing is character introductions. I love to have this. I've told you about my former student Russell, who puts characters in a van to go to on a road trip, and what fast food places would they start with, where would they stop for fast food, what would be on their iPod playlist. I was going to say a cassette, but I think that's a little dated. Anyway, or something as simple as you're going to bring Scout to dinner and you want to get your parents ready for her. What would you say? And in To Kill a Mockingbird, what's the name of the kid who's like, the poor kid who comes and eats or whatever? Um, what if you are bringing somebody who's very different from your family, a kid who grows up in poverty? What would you say to your parents to prepare them for that? Something that gets them thinking about who this character is off the pages and in real life. Role playing does the same thing. Taking a scene from the book and asking some students to role play it, to create dialogue for it. Ooh, there's a writing task, yes, and to act it out so that they're putting themselves into the character, not necessarily walking in their shoes, but having to sort of project and create that character with their own self. And they love the reminders, right? They love to bring in text that means something to them, media that means something to them. A song, a poem, something they saw on TV, that's the text to text connection. And what this says is what you read, your literacy practices outside of the classroom are valid. And we want you to bring them into the classroom if they compare, if they are connected, if they relate to what we're doing in class now. One way that you can get them to compare themselves to characters is with the Venn diagram. Yes, we all have a zillion Venn diagrams in our graphic organizer quiver. And here's just another one, and there's a billion of them online. But the idea of getting them to think how they connect to these characters. How are they like these characters? How are they not? If we're trying to build sympathy, then we need to identify the traits of a character and then examine them and say, oh yeah, I do that. Oh yeah, I'm like that. Wow, I thought that David Copperfield was really different from me. But in reality, we have a lot of things in common. Now, if you've done Stick Student, they've done themselves. They've looked at themselves. They've talked about their interests. You can even do Stick Student where they talk about their strengths and weaknesses, what they think are their best traits and their not so nice traits. Just because you make Stick Student the first week with what your interests are doesn't mean you can't add new levels or new layers to that original diagram that they keep. Well, now they open that up and they do Stick Huck, they do Stick Scout, they do Stick David Copperfield, they do Sticks. Did I say Scout already? Yeah, I think I did. And they talk about themselves in relation to that character. You begin to see maybe I'm more alike with that character than I thought. This is another graphic organizer for an opinion guide because I couldn't find the one that I normally use. But an opinion guide is really simple. It's what are some important opinions that are going to be, or important issues that are going to be raised in the text, and what is your opinion? And then as we read, what are the characters' opinions? And this is a little bit like some of the pre-reading activities we did, anticipating themes. But if the opinions that you want them to begin to think about is, would you be willing to take a stand against the community if they believe one way and you believe another? And then you would get their opinion. And then you would say, well, what would Atticus do? What would Scout do? Those kinds of things. How would you behave towards someone who's different from you and maybe even a little scary? And if they say they would hide in fear, then maybe that would connect to the fear of Boo Radley. You see what I'm getting at. But it's getting them to recognize that they have opinions that are valuable and valid, but so do characters. And are they alike? Are they different? If they're different, why? If they're alike, what does that say? Just creates conversation. Now, when you're thinking about what skills am I doing, how is this not an activity? All of this is character analysis. All of this is digging deeply into a character. And just because we're digging deeply into fictional characters doesn't mean those skills don't transfer over into digging deeply into real life characters, like presidential candidates, like Donald Trump. But I'm not going to say that. There are any number of writing tasks. And remember, students need to write every day, but not every writing has to be something really, you know, formal. So you can use journal prompts. Some of the best teachers I know have bell work, right? Shit that students do in the first few minutes so the teacher can get their head on straight. In teaching 7 through 12, this is vital because they're coming in and coming out all the time, and you got to pee, or you've got to blow your nose, or you just need to sit there for 2 seconds and get your head on straight. Give yourself time. Which character do you like best? Why? Open your journal. If you'd been in this situation, what would you have done? If you'd, lost your pants, or, the various things that happen in these, what would you have done? The lost your pants when Jem, loses his pants or whatever. Anyway, has anything like blank ever happened to you? How would you feel if? Do you know anyone like? Which would you invite to your house for dinner and why? These are all simple general prompts that can take a few minutes while you get stuff done, and then they can talk about it with a partner and then share out. And your job is to then probe them to get them to think critically about the answers that they gave. Authorial technique prompts also fit in this area, and we might tend to think those are more analytical. But remember what an author is trying to do. Remember your rhetorical triangle, right? An author is trying to appeal to the audience. Remember, we always align our audience, the readers, with pathos. How do I tap their emotions? What do I do as an author to create a response in my reader? So this writing task does nothing about talking, empathy, sympathy. What it's talking about is your response to the work is valid. That is as much a level 2 activity as how do you feel about the character? Have you ever experienced the same thing? So if you're not like a touchy-feely person and you don't want to go down that road, then you can focus on how the author is getting an emotional response from you, the reader. And this really sets up discussions of authorial, the skill of an author, and authorial intention. What is it that they're looking to elicit? So you can ask simple questions like, what do you like about the story? What do you dislike? And then thinking, what did the author do to make you like? Or what is the author doing that makes you dislike the story? What is the setting? How does the setting fit? Take all of those literary elements and ask, how is the author working that? What do you like, dislike about the characters? What has the author done to create a character you like? What has the author done to create a character you really dislike? What do you think the author is trying to say? Well, it's asking an opinion. What do you think the author is trying to say? How do you think the author wanted you to feel? Do you like the author's style? Notice in all of these, you. It's asking the student to engage. It's asking the student's opinion. It's simple. It's not that emo crap. It's intellectually challenging, and it's really setting up a deeper discussion of the novel. Now here's another writing task. This is letters. I've always been interested in this, getting students to begin to put on another character, put on a voice. Either writing letters to the characters, offering advice, that's a big one, especially with younger students, they like that. Letters in a character's voice. One of them that has really come up that I think is engaging is, especially with seniors or juniors, writing an application letter for college. If you go online, and somebody remind me, Betsy, send me an email, that there is a site that lists, there are now standard college application questions. There are now questions that college applications, I think we're going to talk about this later too in level 5 as a closing activity. But there are standardized college application questions now because there's a standardized college application, and they give you these various prompts. I love having students at the end of a text, so this is a level 2, but also a level 5. So I think we'll bring it up again in level 5. Having students write that letter in the voice of a character. Fascinating, right? And then postcards from the character. This is one of my favorites. I actually do this when I teach an American Lit survey. You just get those index cards and you have them write postcards from the character, wish you were here, and then draw a picture on the front. I did that in my English 211, God, years and years ago, when I was teaching for the first half. So we had like Anne Bradstreet write one, and John Winthrop write one, and those kinds of things. And that's sort of, it's a fun thing, but it's getting them to, they have to justify. Remember, on all of these things in your discussion, why would they say that? Why would they believe that? See what I'm saying? So that's it's not just this fun activity, it's in the processing of it that you become the questioner to ensure that there are some skills being built with these activities. Hang on a second, I'm going to pause because I have to skip a slide. And finally, there's a writing project, something larger. At each level, I like to think about some kind of a writing project that they can do that's a little bit bigger than just a journal response. And I think one of these is telling their stories, telling a character story. There's a book by Norma Cantu called Canicula. It's one of my favorite books to teach, and I actually taught with Norma Cantu when I was at both in Laredo and in San Antonio. She moved from A&M to UT, and I moved from A&M to UT, and so we were together at both of our places. And Norma's book Canicula is well, she calls it an autobioethnography. So it's her story, but it's also the story of living on the border. And so she creates a fictional character, but that fictional character is really she. And throughout the book, there are photographs and documents. And these are documents of hers and photographs of her. And it's not this, consistent narrative. It's these vignettes that are prompted or triggered by the photograph. So there's a photograph and then a narrative underneath it. And although it'll start with a narrative about the photograph, it often spins off into something different. So the photo becomes the starting point for a reflection that is both autobiographical but also ethnographic. It's a great book. It's a wonderful book to teach. I have many copies of it. Anyway, so that became for me an activity that I would love students to do, which is telling their stories, telling a character story, so that they create their own version of Canicula in a sense. They create a picture, they find a picture, and they use that to spin off from and tell a story. And now that there's so many stills from films available online, so To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think again way better film than book. But you could take a still, and then they can begin to tell Scout's story or Jim's story or Boo's story. And so there's various tools that you can use to get them to think that way. And there's life maps where they can, do a timeline of events in their lives or a timeline of events in Scout's life. Oh, think about it. That's like math. Then there's place maps where they can take, they can draw a map and put themselves, their own movements, a character's movements. You could trace the rise in those first opening pages of To Kill a Mockingbird. You could chase, how the finches made their way up from wherever to wherever. I think body maps is interesting, is where you have them draw their own body and then note their scars on it. What are the stories behind those scars? I scraped my knee, I had stitches, I broke an arm, etc., etc. And then the photos and captions or narratives that you can do that are the Norma Cantu version that I've been describing. Anyway, these are simple activities that involve a variety of skills. One of the things that your task is to say, okay, what are the skills that I can teach using these activities? I have a quiver full of cool activities. What particular skills can I highlight with each of these? And you will be doing a level 2. So I think that's it. And our next visit will be level 3.